The COO's face went red as he stabbed a finger toward my screen. These route calculations are defective, Avadny. Completely unreliable. My hands were still resting on the keyboard when security showed up at my cubicle. 23 minutes later my badge was deactivated, my system access pulled, and I was walking out of Skybridge Aviation with a cardboard box that barely weighed 3 pounds. I didn't push back. I didn't defend the 18 months of work that had rebuilt their entire logistics matrix from scratch. I just left. At 7:45 the next morning my phone started going off. Text after text. Email after email. Then the calls started. Numbers I didn't recognize, and numbers I did but hadn't heard from in months. FAA officials had shown up at Skybridge headquarters with grounding orders. Every single aircraft in the fleet, 47 planes worth more than $680 million, was being grounded pending emergency safety inspections. The VP of Operations, Richard Holloway, stood in the executive conference room watching through the glass as inspection teams swarmed the facility. Witnesses later said he loosened his tie with shaking hands and muttered to the COO, "The woman whose matrix holds our entire $680 million logistics infrastructure. What have we done?" But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get into how one termination decision brought an entire aviation company to its knees, a quick note. If stories about workplace justice, corporate accountability, and what happens when companies underestimate the wrong person speak to you, consider joining this community. We're working toward 5,000 subscribers, and your support keeps these stories coming. There's a subscribe button nearby if you want in. Now here's what actually happened. My name is Avadny Reyes, and until that Wednesday afternoon I was the Senior Logistics Systems Analyst at Skybridge Aviation. The title doesn't really cover what I did, but corporate titles rarely do. I grew up in a neighborhood where my mother worked 2 jobs to keep our small apartment running, and my father drove delivery trucks 6 days a week. We weren't poor, we always had food on the table and a roof over our heads, but my parents understood the value of a dollar earned and the dignity in doing work right. They taught me that empathy isn't weakness. It's a foundation, a way of understanding how systems touch real people, real families, real lives. That became the base everything else was built on. I put myself through state college, graduated with degrees in math and computer science, and spent 5 years at a freight logistics company before Skybridge came calling. They wanted someone who could optimize their route systems, cut fuel costs, and improve on-time performance without cutting corners on safety. I delivered all 3. What they didn't expect was that I'd build something so woven into their daily operations that pulling me out of it would be like yanking the keystone out of an arch. When I first got to Skybridge, their logistics were a mess. Routes were planned on software from 2009, updated by hand across 3 departments that barely talked to each other. Flight crews often didn't learn about cargo loads until 90 minutes before departure. Maintenance schedules collided with route assignments. Fuel calculations were padded so conservatively it amounted to waste. They were essentially flying with extra weight just in case. All of it was costing them millions a year. My first assignment was a diagnostic. I spent 6 weeks just watching, interviewing crew, maintenance staff, cargo handlers, dispatchers, sitting in on planning meetings, combing through 3 years of flight data, delay reports, fuel records, maintenance logs. What I found wasn't a set of isolated glitches. It was systemic failure caused by information silos. Cargo didn't talk to dispatch didn't coordinate with maintenance schedules were built around equipment availability instead of operational need. Nobody was looking at the whole picture. So I built one. I called it Nexus because that's exactly what it was, a single point where every operational thread converged into one unified intelligence. It pulled in every data source across the operation. Weather patterns, aircraft maintenance histories, crew availability and certifications, cargo weight and balance requirements, fuel pricing swings across airports, air traffic control delay patterns, even seasonal wind currents affecting flight times. Nexus didn't just plan routes. It optimized the whole operational flow. Within 4 months of launch, on-time performance climbed 22%. Fuel costs dropped 18%. Maintenance efficiency improved because the system scheduled service during natural gaps in operations instead of pulling aircraft out of rotation to force it. The company saved $4.3 million in the first fiscal year alone. I got a bonus. I got recognized at the quarterly meeting. I got bumped up to senior analyst. What I didn't get was any real authority over the system I'd built. The COO, Damian Whitmore, joined Skybridge about 11 months after Nexus went live. He came from a legacy commercial airline, one of the big names where bureaucracy moved slower than their widebody jets. He had an MBA from an expensive school, 20 years of executive experience, and the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been seriously challenged. He also had very fixed ideas about how aviation logistics should run, ideas shaped in an era before integrated systems analysis existed. Our first meeting was polite enough. He asked about Nexus, praised the cost savings, threw out a few surface-level technical questions. I walked him through the architecture, the machine learning models adapting to operational patterns, the predictive maintenance modeling, the dynamic routing adjusting in real time. He nodded, smiled, called it impressive work for a mid-level analyst. Mid-level. I was senior. I let it go. The trouble started about 6 weeks after he'd settled in. Damian wanted to expand the fleet, 12 new aircraft, for new regional routes. Reasonable growth in theory, except he wanted it done in 7 months. Aggressive but not impossible. What was impossible was doing it under the manual override protocols he insisted on adding. He brought in a consulting firm from New York, 3 people in tailored suits who spent 2 weeks asking questions my documentation already answered. Their recommendation: keep route assignments under executive discretion, instead of leaving it entirely to the algorithm. Damian wanted people, specifically managers who answered to him, to have override power over routes Nexus had already calculated. I explained why that was a problem. Nexus wasn't finding the shortest line between 2 points. It was balancing dozens of variables at once. Manual overrides would trigger cascading inefficiencies, change one route assignment and it hits fuel calculations, which hits weight distribution, which hits maintenance scheduling, which hits crew rotations. Everything's connected. The system is interconnected, I told him. In a meeting with the VP of Operations and the Director of Flight Services. Manual overrides don't account for downstream impacts. We'd lose the efficiency gains. Damian gave me that patronizing smile, men in corner offices reserved for women who push back. Evadne, I appreciate your perspective, but systems should serve people. Not the other way around. We need flexibility. Human judgment still matters in this business. I agree, human judgment matters, I said. That's why I built flexibility into Nexus. It provides optimized options, not rigid mandates. But overrides need to be strategic, not arbitrary. Nobody said anything about arbitrary, he replied, his smile tightening. We're talking about experienced executives making informed decisions. Richard Holloway, the VP, shifted in his seat. He'd seen Nexuses before and after. He knew the numbers. But he was also reading the room. A new COO with the CEO's full backing, against a senior analyst, however effective. Let's table this for now, Richard said. Damian, why don't you work with Evadne on a protocol that preserves system efficiency, while allowing for necessary executive input? Translation: find a compromise before this turns into a real problem. But Damian didn't want a compromise. He wanted control. Over the next 4 months, Damian chipped away at Nexus piece by piece. He started small manual route changes for VIP cargo, or to protect some client relationship. The system would calculate the optimal route for a shipment, and Damian would swap it for a different aircraft or timing, because some regional manager wanted to impress a client. I logged every override and the inefficiency it caused: wasted fuel, delayed departures, maintenance conflicts. The data was unambiguous. Every manual override cost the company money and efficiency. I sent monthly reports to Richard. He acknowledged them and did nothing. Then Damian brought in his own people. A new director of logistics planning, Marcus Brennan, who'd worked under Damian at his previous company. Marcus knew traditional logistics but had no background in integrated systems analysis. His approach was old school. Decide on instinct and experience, adjust when things break. Nexus worked the opposite way. Anticipate the problem before it happens, optimize proactively. Marcus and I clashed immediately. He wanted to simplify the system, strip out what he called unnecessary complexity. I tried explaining that the complexity wasn't unnecessary, it was the entire point. You can't optimize a multivariable system by flattening it into single-variable decisions. You're over-engineering this, Marcus told me in a meeting. It's literally aerospace logistics, I said. It's adjacent to rocket science. He didn't appreciate the joke. The rail break came with the fleet expansion. Damien pushed ahead with the 12 new aircraft, smaller regional jets meant to service the new routes. The timeline was aggressive. 6 months from acquisition to full operational deployment. Nexus could handle it, but only with a properly done integration. The new planes had different fuel burn rates, different cargo capacities, different maintenance needs. The system needed updated specifications for each aircraft type, and the routing algorithms needed recalibration to account for the new fleet mix. I submitted a project plan. 8 weeks for system updates, 2 for testing and calibration, 2 for crew training on the new interface. 12 weeks total, comfortably ahead of the aircraft delivery schedule. Damien rejected it. Too slow. We need this done in 4 weeks. That's not realistic, I said. Cutting corners on system integration creates safety risks and operational vulnerabilities. Then prioritize, he said. Focus on what's essential. The rest gets updated after deployment. It's all essential. That's how integrated systems work. His jaw tightened. You know, Avadny, I'm starting to think you're more attached to protecting your system than helping this company grow. That's when I knew we were past a professional disagreement. This had turned personal. A power struggle wearing a technical debate as a disguise. I went to Richard directly. He was the VP who championed Nexus from day one. If anyone would grasp the stakes, it'd be him. We met in his office on a Friday afternoon. I brought comparison charts on system performance with and without manual overrides, risk projections for a rushed fleet integration, cost-benefit numbers on proper implementation versus a fast-tracked one. Richard listened. He read through the material. He rubbed his temples like a migraine was coming on. Avadny, your concerns are valid, he finally said. But you have to understand the position I'm in. Damien has the CEO's full support. This fleet expansion is the board's priority. If I push back too hard, I'm not protecting the company. I'm just painting a target on my own back. So we just ignore operational risks because of office politics. I'm not saying ignore them. I'm saying manage them strategically. Do the 4-week integration. Document any concerns. If problems arise, we'll have the data to support additional resources. If problems arise in an aviation logistics system, people could get hurt. You're being dramatic. That word stung. I'd never been dramatic in my life. Precise, thorough, methodical. I'd built my whole career on letting the data speak for itself. I'm being realistic, I said quietly. And if you won't listen, I'll need to escalate this to the Safety Compliance Office. Richard's face hardened. That would be a serious mistake. You'd be going over the heads of your entire chain of command based on hypothetical risks. It would damage your credibility and your career here. My career isn't worth someone's safety. Nobody's safety is at risk. You're catastrophizing because you don't like Damien's management style. We stared at each other across his desk. In that moment I understood he'd already made his choice. Loyalty to the executive team outweighed loyalty to operational integrity. I stood up. I'll do the integration in 4 weeks, but I'm documenting everything. Every shortcut, every risk, every compromise. If something goes wrong, the record will show I tried to prevent it. You do what you need to do, Richard said. Just remember, team players find solutions. Problems focus on obstacles. I've been called a lot of things in my career. Problem was a new one. I worked 70-hour weeks for the next month. Nights, weekends, early mornings before anyone else showed up. I reconfigured Nexus to bring in the new aircraft, but I had to cut corners to hit Damien's deadline. Normally I'd have run 300 simulation scenarios to test updated algorithms. I ran 80. Normally I'd have calibrated fuel models against actual test flight data for each new aircraft. I used manufacturer specs instead. Normally I'd have cross-checked maintenance scheduling protocols with the engineering team. I built them off standard models and hoped they held up. Every shortcut felt like a small betrayal, not of the company, of the work itself, of the standards I'd built my name on. But I hit the deadline. For weeks after Damien's order, Nexus went live with the new fleet fully integrated. On a Monday morning. By Wednesday, small issues started popping up. A route assignment that didn't account for a regional jet's fuel capacity, forcing an unplanned refueling stop. A maintenance window colliding with a cargo delivery deadline. Minor stuff, the kind that shows up during any system transition. I fixed them as they surfaced and filed incident reports, recommending a 2-week window running Nexus and manual oversight in parallel to catch any remaining integration gaps. Marcus dismissed it. The system's working fine. A few hiccups are normal. Stop trying to justify your initial timeline. The problems kept coming. Most were minor. One wasn't. Flight SB447, a regional jet carrying cargo from our main hub to a secondary airport, was assigned a route by Nexus that should have been routine. But the algorithm hadn't properly accounted for the new aircraft's weight distribution profile. The cargo was loaded to standard protocol, but that particular model had a slightly different center of gravity threshold. Nothing catastrophic happened, the flight landed safely, but the pilot reported handling issues on approach, and the post-flight inspection turned up stress indicators on the airframe. Nothing damaged, but were patterns that shouldn't show up on a routine flight. The incident report landed on my desk flagged as a possible system error. I dug in immediately, ran diagnostics, traced the algorithm's math, found the gap in my calibration data. It was exactly what I'd warned about: incomplete integration from a rushed rollout. I filed a detailed report with my findings and a recommendation, ground the new regional jets until I could recalibrate the weight distribution algorithms using actual aircraft specs instead of manufacturer estimates. 2 weeks of work maximum. The report went to Marcus. Marcus forwarded it to Damien. Damien's answer came back through Marcus. System error identified and being addressed. No fleet action necessary. Continue monitoring. They weren't grounding the jets. They were going to keep flying them and hope I could patch the problem around the operating schedule. I tried once more. A direct email to Damien copying Richard, laying out the technical detail and risk assessment in plain language. Continued operation without recalibration creates elevated risk of weight distribution errors that could compromise flight safety. Damien called me into his office the next morning. His office was a corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows over the airfield. I'd been in there exactly 3 times before, and never for good news. He didn't ask me to sit. I received your email, he said, standing behind his desk, arms crossed. Let me be very clear about something, Evadne. I appreciate technical expertise. I value analytical thinking. What I don't value is fear-mongering and insubordination. I'm not fear-mongering. I'm identifying operational risks based on data. You're trying to force your preferred timeline by exaggerating minor issues. That incident with SB447 was a pilot reporting handling characteristics on an unfamiliar aircraft. The inspection found nothing wrong. The inspection found stress indicators within acceptable parameters. You're catastrophizing again. Marcus warned me you'd do this. Of course Marcus had warned him. They'd already decided I was the problem. The system needs recalibration, I said, keeping my voice level. That's not catastrophizing. That's responsible engineering. The system is fine. You rushed the integration, and now you're trying to cover yourself by creating alarm. I see what's happening here. What's happening is I met an impossible deadline by making compromises I documented extensively. Now those compromises are creating exactly the problems I predicted. Fixing them isn't covering myself. It's doing my job. Damien's face went cold. Your job is what I say it is. And right now your job is to monitor the system, address minor issues as they arise, and support our operational growth. Not undermine company initiatives with worst-case scenario hypotheticals. Flight safety isn't a worst-case scenario hypothetical. Nobody's safety is at risk. You're being dramatic because you don't like being told no. There it was again, dramatic. The word men use when women won't stay quiet. I'm being precise, I said. There's a difference. The only thing you're being is insubordinate. Consider this an official warning. Drop this crusade about grounding aircraft, or there will be consequences for your employment. We stood there staring at each other across his expensive desk. Through the window behind him, one of the new regional jets was taxiing for departure. Are you ordering me not to report safety concerns? I asked quietly. I'm ordering you to stop exaggerating minor technical hiccups into safety crises. There's a difference. He was building himself an alibi. If something went wrong, he could claim he'd never told me not to report legitimate concerns, that I'd simply been overreacting. I left his office without another word. That night I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop. I had 6 months of documentation emails, incident reports, risk assessments, technical write-ups, a full record of every concern I'd raised, every warning I'd given, every corner I'd been forced to cut. And I had a decision to make. Option 1, let it go. Keep monitoring Nexus, patch problems as they came up, hope nothing catastrophic happened. Keep my job, my paycheck, my trajectory. Swallow it and play along. Option 2. Escalate to the Safety Compliance Office, trigger a formal review, almost certainly get fired in retaliation, but at least leave a record that might head off disaster. Option 3. Go straight to the FAA, the nuclear option, blow the whistle on my own employer, guarantee I'd never work in aviation again, but ensure real regulatory oversight. I thought about my parents. My father, who'd driven delivery trucks for 30 years and never once cut a corner on safety, because someone was counting on that delivery, and someone was counting on him to get it there right. My mother, who'd worked retail management and always said if you see something wrong and stay quiet, you're part of the problem. They'd raised me to put integrity ahead of convenience. But they'd also raised me during years when jobs were scarce and employers held all the leverage. They'd taught me to be careful, to be strategic, to choose my battles. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I went in and did something I'd never done before. I started building a backup of Nexus. Not the company's backup, a personal archive. Every algorithm, every line of code, every data integration protocol, copied onto an encrypted external drive. If they were going to push me out for trying to protect safety, they weren't also going to erase the proof that I'd been right. It took 3 days to finish the copy without tripping any IT security alerts. Lunch breaks, early mornings, late evenings, whenever system monitoring was thin. On Friday afternoon I filed a formal report with the Safety Compliance Office. Detailed technical documentation of the integration gaps, a risk assessment for continued operation without recalibration, recommendations for corrective action. Sent through official channels. Nobody copied. No warning to Damien. By Monday morning I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't walk back. The Safety Compliance Office sent an investigator to interview me Tuesday afternoon, professional, thorough, sharp questions. I walked her through everything, showed her the documentation, laid out the timeline. She thanked me for the report and said they'd conduct a full review. I never heard from her again. What I did hear 2 days later was Damien's voice outside my cubicle. Evadne. My office. Now. The walk down that hallway felt like walking to an execution. Marcus was already sitting in Damien's office when I arrived, along with someone from Human Resources, a woman I'd seen around but never worked with directly. Sit down, Damien said. Iset. We've completed a review of your recent work on the Nexus system integration, he began, reading off a document. We've identified multiple instances of defective route calculations, improper weight distribution algorithms, and inadequate safety protocols. My stomach dropped. That's not accurate. The integration gaps I identified are exactly what I've been trying to. You submitted a system update that created safety risks, he cut in. When those risks were identified, you attempted to deflect blame by claiming you'd been rushed. You filed false reports exaggerating minor issues. You wasted safety compliance resources with unfounded allegations. Every word of my compliance report was accurate and documented. Your compliance report was a manipulative attempt to cover your own inadequate work. The review committee found your claims unsubstantiated. What review committee? I spoke to one investigator. Internal review. We take safety seriously here, Evadne. We don't take kindly to employees who create false alarms to protect their reputations. He was rewriting the timeline in real time, flipping every warning I'd given into the reason I was the problem, instead of the person trying to head off the problem in the first place. This is retaliation, I said quietly. I filed a legitimate safety complaint, and now you're manufacturing cause to terminate me. The HR rep shifted in her seat but said nothing. This is consequences, Damien replied. Your system's roots are defective. Your work has been inadequate. We're terminating your employment effective immediately, for cause. For cause means no severance. Correct. And you're blaming me for problems I explicitly warned would happen if you rushed the integration I said needed 12 weeks. We're blaming you for delivering defective work, and then trying to cover it up. Security will escort you out. Your system access is being revoked as we speak. Marcus actually smiled, small, satisfied, the smile of a man watching a rival get eliminated. I stood up. You're making a serious mistake. The only mistake was trusting you with critical systems. We'll find someone more competent. Security was waiting outside. A young guy who looked uncomfortable with the whole thing. He walked me to my cubicle and stood by while I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. The coffee mug my mother gave me, a small succulent, a framed photo of my parents. 23 minutes after Damien said the word defective, I was walking out of Skybridge Aviation with everything I owned from 2 years of employment in a box that weighed less than my laptop bag. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just left. But I had that encrypted drive in my purse, every algorithm, every line of code, every piece of documentation proving exactly what I'd built and exactly what they'd wrecked. I spent Wednesday in my apartment, swinging between rage and despair, updating my resume, scrolling job boards, wondering if I just torched my aviation career for nothing. Thursday, calls started coming in from former colleagues, quiet calls on personal phones. Something's wrong with Nexus. One of the junior analysts told me. Routes aren't optimizing properly. Marcus is trying to fix it, but he doesn't understand the architecture. Not my problem anymore, I said. But it nagged at me all day. Friday morning, a friend in maintenance scheduling called. Half our crew rotations are conflicting with service windows. The system's generating impossible schedules. Marcus is running manual overrides, but it's chaos. They fired me for building a defective system, I said. Let them fix their perfect system themselves. Friday afternoon, the flight operations supervisor called. Evadne off the record. Fuel calculations are off. Not by much, but enough that we're adjusting loads by hand before every departure. Whatever Marcus changed, it broke something in the core algorithms. That got my attention. Fuel calculations weren't cosmetic. They were safety critical. Has anyone reported this to safety compliance? Marcus says it's just calibration issues. Temporary glitch while the system stabilizes. It won't stabilize. The architecture doesn't work that way. If core algorithms are compromised, it cascades. Can you come back? Fix it. They fired me for cause. I don't work there anymore. Right, yeah, sorry, I just thought never mind. I almost called Richard. Almost offered to consult, help them stabilize things before someone got hurt. Then I remembered, you're being dramatic. Stop catastrophizing. Team players find solutions. They'd made their choice. They could live with it. Friday evening I poured a glass of wine and tried to watch television and not think about fuel calculations or cascading failures or what happens when people who don't understand integrated architecture try to repair one anyway. I went to bed early, phone on silent. When I woke up Saturday morning and checked my messages, I had 47 notifications. The timeline as I pieced it together afterward. Friday 6:15 p.m. Flight SB229 departed with a cargo load calculated by Marcus's manually adjusted version of Nexus. The weight distribution was off. Not catastrophically, the aircraft was still flyable, but wrong enough that fuel burn ran higher than calculated. Friday 7:43 p.m. SB229 landed with fuel reserves below regulatory minimums. The captain filed a safety report. Friday 9:20 p.m. 2 more flights reported similar fuel discrepancies, all with cargo loads run through the adjusted system. Friday 11:35 p.m. The overnight operations manager, a career aviation professional who didn't care about office politics, pulled the 3 reports together and sent an emergency notification to the FAA duty officer. Saturday 2:14 a.m. The FAA opened an investigation. Saturday 7:45 a.m. FAA officials arrived at Skybridge headquarters with emergency grounding orders. Every aircraft in the fleet, 47 planes, $680 million in assets, grounded pending safety inspections and system audits. By the time I saw my messages Saturday morning, Skybridge was national news. Aviation sites, business press, industry forums, all covering the story of a mid-sized cargo airline grounded by its own logistics system. My phone kept ringing, numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail. Then Richard's number came up. I almost didn't answer. Evadne. His voice sounded like he'd aged 10 years overnight. We need your help. No, you don't. You have Marcus. He understands the system perfectly. Marcus's changes broke core algorithms. The FAA is demanding a complete system audit and certification before they'll lift the grounding. We need someone who understands Nexus's full architecture. You fired that person for cause. Silence on the line. I know mistakes were made. But right now $680 million in aircraft are sitting idle. We're losing millions a day. Contracts are getting cancelled. If this doesn't get fixed immediately, Skybridge doesn't survive. Sounds like a problem for your competent new hire. Evadne, please.
I'm asking.
You're not asking. You're begging. There's a difference. More silence. What would it take, he finally said, for me to help the company that trashed my reputation and fired me for trying to prevent exactly this? Yes. I stared at the ceiling of my apartment and thought about everyone at Skybridge who had nothing to do with Damien's ego or Marcus's incompetence. Ground crew, pilots, cargo handlers, administrative staff, people with families and mortgages whose lives depended on the company staying in the air. Full reinstatement, I said. Back pay from the termination date. A written apology from Damien acknowledging the termination was unjustified. And Marcus Brennan fired. I can't promise. Then good luck with the FAA. I hung up. Richard called back 20 minutes later. Damien wants to meet. In person. I'm sure he does. He's authorized to negotiate full reinstatement terms. I'm not negotiating. I gave you my terms. Yes or no? Can you at least meet with him? Professional courtesy. Professional courtesy is what you show employees before you fire them without cause. I'm fresh out. I hung up again. The third call came an hour later. Unknown number. Miss Reyes, this is Inspector Charlotte Webb with the FAA. I'm leading the investigation into the Skybridge aviation grounding. I'd like to speak with you about your role in developing their logistics systems. That one was different. Of course, I said. When and where? We met that afternoon at a coffee shop near my apartment. Inspector Webb was in her 50s, gray hair, sharp eyes, the look of someone who'd spent decades in aviation and had no patience for fools. I've reviewed the incident reports from Friday night, she said once we'd sat down. I've also reviewed your employment file, including your termination documentation and your safety compliance report from last week. And I'm trying to understand how a company fires their senior systems analyst for reporting safety concerns, then experiences catastrophic system failures 5 days later. Funny how that works. Walk me through the Nexus system. How it's supposed to function, what you built, what changed. I spent 2 hours walking her through the architecture, the integration protocols, the rushed rollout, the corners I'd been forced to cut, the warnings I'd given, the retaliation that followed. Inspector Webb took notes, asked sharp questions, clearly understood the technical side well enough that she'd done her homework. Do you have documentation of all this? She asked. Every email, every report, every technical spec. Complete archive. I'm going to need copies. Are you investigating the system failure or the termination? Both. If Skybridge retaliated against you for reporting legitimate safety concerns, that's a violation of federal whistleblower protections. If they then operated aircraft with known system deficiencies, that's a violation of safety regulations. If both of those are true, this is a serious federal case. How serious? The kind where executives lose their jobs and companies lose their operating certificates. I pulled out my laptop. Let me get you those files. Richard called again Sunday morning. We accept your terms. All of them. In writing, our attorney is drafting the agreement now. You'll have it by end of business today. And Marcus? Terminated yesterday afternoon. And Damien? A pause. Still employed. He's the Evadne. The board isn't going to fire a C-suite executive based on. Then no deal. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You want me to fix the system Damien broke by ignoring my expertise. He goes first.
Non negotiable.
I'll talk to the CEO. You do that. The CEO called me directly 2 hours later. Andrew Castellano, founder of Skybridge, a man I'd met exactly twice in 2 years. Miss Reyes, I owe you an apology. A significant apology. Yes, you do. I'm not going to make excuses. Damien came highly recommended. I gave him latitude to restructure operations. I didn't monitor the situation closely enough. That failure is mine. And now I have a grounded fleet, a federal investigation, and the person who can fix this telling me my COO has to go. You're not wrong. But I need you to understand the position this puts me in. The position you're in is the result of choices you made. I told you what I need. The question is whether you're willing to prioritize operational integrity over executive ego. Silence on the line. Long silence. Damien will be accepting a voluntary resignation, effective immediately. We'll announce it as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. I want it announced as resignation pending investigation of operational failures. That's career suicide for him. He tried to engineer career suicide for me. I'm being generous by letting him resign instead of getting fired. Another pause. Agreed. Anything else? Marcus doesn't get a resignation. He gets fired for cause. I won't work for a company that gives him the dignity of a graceful exit after what he did. Done. When can you start? After I receive written agreements on every term, reviewed by my attorney. 2 business days. We're losing millions per day. You should have thought of that before you fired me. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Powerful. I came back to Skybridge on a Wednesday morning. My badge worked. My office, not a cubicle, an actual office, was waiting. The agreement had included a promotion to Director of Logistics Systems, salary bumped accordingly, a seat in operational planning meetings. The staff who'd worked under me looked relieved. A few looked guilty. They'd known what was happening, known it was wrong, stayed quiet to protect themselves. I didn't blame them. Corporate survival isn't pretty. All right, I said in the emergency team meeting Wednesday afternoon. Show me what Marcus broke. It was worse than I'd expected. He hadn't just tweaked algorithms, he'd rewritten core functions without understanding how they linked to everything downstream. It was like watching someone repair a watch with a hammer. How long to fix? Richard asked. To get you back in the air with FAA approval, 2 weeks minimum. 2 weeks. You wanted it done right. Right takes time. I can get you flying again in 3 days with manual overrides and reduced capacity, but full system restoration is 2 weeks. Do both. 3 days to get aircraft moving, 2 weeks to full optimization. I worked around the clock for 72 hours, my team, and they were my team again working alongside me. We stripped out Marcus's changes, restored the original algorithms from my backup, recalibrated the integration properly this time. On Saturday morning, 6 days after the grounding, Skybridge aircraft started flying again under FAA provisional approval with manual oversight. 2 weeks later, Nexus was fully operational, properly integrated, running more efficiently than ever. 3 months later, the FAA closed out its investigation. Skybridge was fined $2.4 million for operating with deficient safety protocols. Damien Whitmore was personally fined and barred from executive roles in aviation for 5 years. Marcus Brennan's for-cause termination was upheld. My whistleblower complaint was validated. The company was required to put in place new protections for employees reporting safety concerns. I was offered a vice president position. I turned it down. A year after the grounding, I left Skybridge. Not fired, recruited. A major aviation consulting firm wanted someone to help airlines build integrated logistics systems, someone who understood both the technical architecture and the organizational politics, someone with a reputation for not backing down when safety was on the line. The salary was substantial. The work meant something. I took it. But before I left, I did one last thing. I rebuilt Nexus with redundancy protocols that made it nearly impossible for executives to compromise core safety functions without triggering automatic alerts to safety compliance and the FAA. I built in tracking systems that logged every override, every manual adjustment, every deviation from the optimized protocol. I made it technically and legally difficult for what happened to me to happen to anyone else. Andrew Castellano understood exactly what I'd done. You're building accountability into the code itself, he said during my exit interview. Someone has to, I replied. For what it's worth, you were right about everything. I'm sorry it took a federal grounding for me to see it. I'm not sorry it happened. I'm sorry it was necessary. What will you tell people about your time here? I thought about that. The late nights, the betrayals, the vindication, the moment Damien's face went pale when the FA walked in. Richard loosening his tie and whispering, "What have we done?" "I'll tell them the truth," I said. "That systems are only as good as the people who respect them. That integrity isn't negotiable. And that sometimes the right thing costs you everything in the moment but pays compound interest over time." He nodded. "We'll miss you. You'll be fine. You have good people here. Just listen to them." My last day at Skybridge was quiet. No farewell party, no dramatic exit. I packed up my office, said goodbye to my team, and walked out the same doors I'd been escorted through a year earlier. The difference was everything. That's the story of how one termination decision brought an entire aviation company to its knees, and how standing up for what's right sometimes means losing everything before you gain anything. If stories like this resonate with you, stories about integrity in the workplace, standing up to corporate power, the long game of professional vindication, I hope you'll consider subscribing. We're building toward 5,000 subscribers, and your support keeps these stories coming. The subscribe button is there if you'd like to join us. I work in aviation consulting now. I help companies build systems that put safety ahead of convenience and accountability ahead of politics. I teach engineers and analysts that their expertise matters, that speaking up is worth the risk, and that the people who call you dramatic are usually the ones who fear your precision. Sometimes former colleagues from Skybridge reach out. They tell me Nexus is still running, still optimizing, still saving the company millions while keeping things safe. They tell me the culture changed after the grounding, that people speak up now, that concerns get heard, that the company learned its lesson. I hope that's true. But I also know institutional change is fragile, that new executives will show up with their own egos and agendas, that the cycle could repeat if people stop paying attention. That's why I built those accountability protocols into the system, not because I don't trust people, but because I trust systems to outlast any one person's good intentions. My mother asks me sometimes if it was worth it, the stress, the termination, the uncertainty, the fight. I tell her what I told Andrew Castellano. I'm not sorry it happened. I'm sorry it was necessary. But I'd do it again. Because at the end of the day, I can look in the mirror and know that when safety and career sat on opposite ends of the scale, I chose correctly.
I chose integrity.
And that's a choice I'll never regret. My name is Evadne Reyes. I'm the woman whose matrix held a $680 million logistics infrastructure. The woman they called defective before they realized I was the only thing holding their operation together. And this is what happens when companies underestimate the wrong person.